There was a time in America when two boys grew up in the same city, went to the same school, and had access to almost the same opportunities, but their lives turned out completely different. One of them followed the traditional path: study hard, get good grades, find a stable job, and work for security. The other chose a completely different way of thinking, one that most people don't understand until it's too late. And the difference between these two paths would eventually define not just their careers, but their entire financial future. Robert, a curious young boy, often found himself confused about one simple question: why do some people work hard their entire lives and still struggle financially, while others seem to create wealth almost effortlessly? His own father, whom he called his poor dad, was highly educated, respected, and believed strongly in the idea of job security. He worked hard, followed the rules, and always advised Robert to do the same: get a good education, find a secure job, and avoid financial risks. But then there was his best friend Mike's father, his rich dad. Unlike Robert's father, he didn't have fancy degrees or a traditional career path, yet he was constantly building businesses, investing in opportunities, and thinking about money in a completely different way. Where poor dad believed in playing it safe, rich dad believed in learning how money actually works. One day, Robert asked a simple question that most people are afraid to ask: how can I become rich? His poor dad's answer was predictable: study hard, get good grades, and work for a good company. But that answer didn't satisfy him. Something felt incomplete. It sounded safe, but not powerful. So Robert turned to his rich dad, hoping for a different answer. But instead of giving him advice, rich dad gave him a challenge. He didn't teach him through lectures or theories. He taught him through experience. He offered Robert and Mike a small job, but with a twist. The pay was extremely low, almost unfair. Most people would have quit immediately, feeling undervalued and frustrated. And that's exactly what rich dad wanted to see. Because at that moment, he wasn't teaching them how to earn money. He was teaching them how to think about money. As weeks passed, Robert started feeling angry. He thought, why am I working so hard for so little? It felt unfair. It felt frustrating. And just like most people, he wanted to quit. But when he finally confronted rich dad, expecting an explanation or maybe a raise, he received something much more valuable. Rich dad smiled and said, this is exactly what most people do. They work, they get underpaid, they complain, and then they quit. Or they stay stuck, hoping things will magically get better. But they never stop to ask the most important question: how can I make money work for me instead of working for money? That moment changed everything. Robert realized that the problem was not the job, not the salary, and not the system. The problem was the mindset. Most people are trapped in what rich dad called the rat race, a cycle where they work hard to earn money, then spend that money on bills, and then go back to work again. Over and over, year after year, without ever breaking free. Rich dad explained that fear and desire control most people's financial decisions. Fear of not having money makes them work harder, while the desire for more money keeps them chasing higher salaries. But this cycle never ends, because no matter how much they earn, their expenses grow with it. And this is where the biggest lesson begins. The difference between the rich and the poor is not just income, it's how they think. Poor and middle class people work for money. Rich people make money work for them. This idea sounded simple, but it completely challenged everything Robert had been taught. For the first time, he understood that financial education is not something you learn in school. Schools teach you how to be a good employee, but they rarely teach you how to become financially independent. Rich dad introduced him to a new way of thinking, one where money is not the goal, but a tool. A tool that, if used correctly, can create freedom instead of stress. He said, if you work for money, you give power to your employer. But if money works for you, you take control of your life. That single statement planted a seed in Robert's mind. From that day forward, he stopped looking at jobs the same way. Instead of asking, how much will I earn? He started asking, what will I learn? Because rich dad believed that the most important asset a person can build is not money, but knowledge about money. And this was just the beginning of a completely different journey. One that would challenge everything Robert thought he knew about success, security, and wealth. Because in the real world, it's not the smartest people who get rich, it's the ones who understand how money really works. As Robert continued learning from his rich dad, he slowly began to realize that the biggest difference between rich people and everyone else was not how much money they earned, but how they understood the concept of assets and liabilities. This was a lesson so simple, yet so powerful, that it completely changed the way he looked at money forever. Most people think they understand money, but in reality, they are unknowingly making financial decisions that keep them stuck in the same cycle their entire lives. Rich Dad explained it in the simplest way possible. An asset is something that puts money into your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. That's it. No complicated financial jargon, no confusing theories, just one clear rule. But the shocking part was that most people, even highly educated ones, don't follow this rule. Robert started observing the lives of people around him. He noticed that middle-class families often worked hard, earned decent incomes, and then spent that money on things they believed were assets, like big houses, expensive cars, and luxury items. But in reality, those things were liabilities. They required maintenance, monthly payments, insurance, and constant expenses. Instead of putting money into their pockets, they were taking money out. This realization hit hard, because society had taught everyone the opposite. People were told that owning a big house was a sign of success, that buying a new car meant you were doing well, and that spending money on expensive things made you look rich. But Rich Dad saw things differently. He believed that true wealth is not about looking rich. It's about being financially free. He explained that poor and middle-class people focus on increasing their income, while rich people focus on acquiring assets. Instead of working harder for money, rich people make smart decisions that allow money to flow toward them consistently, even when they are not actively working. Robert began to understand why so many people, despite earning high salaries, still lived paycheck to paycheck. Every time their income increased, their expenses increased even more. This is what Rich Dad called the lifestyle inflation trap. The more you earn, the more you spend, and the cycle never ends. But Rich Dad taught him a different approach. Instead of immediately upgrading your lifestyle when you earn more, use that extra money to acquire assets. Things like businesses, investments, stocks, or real estate that generate income over time. These assets slowly build a strong financial foundation, allowing you to eventually live off the income they produce. This was a completely different mindset, because most people chase comfort first and freedom later. But Rich Dad believed in building freedom first, so that comfort becomes permanent. He also introduced Robert to a powerful idea: the difference between working for money and having money work for you. Most people spend their entire lives trading time for money. They work more hours, take on more responsibilities, and hope for promotions. But no matter how much they work, their time is limited. There are only so many hours in a day. But assets don't have that limitation. An asset can generate income 24/7, even while you sleep. That's what makes it powerful. It breaks the direct link between time and money. Robert started to see that true financial success is not about working harder, but about thinking smarter. It's about building systems that generate income without requiring your constant effort. Rich Dad also warned him about one of the biggest mistakes people make. They confuse income with wealth. Just because someone earns a high salary doesn't mean they are wealthy. In fact, many high-income individuals are deeply in debt, living under constant financial pressure. Wealth, as Rich Dad defined it, is not how much money you make. It's how long you can survive without working while maintaining your lifestyle. It's about financial independence, not financial appearance. This idea was powerful because it shifted the focus completely. Instead of chasing a bigger paycheck, Robert started thinking about building long-term stability and freedom. Another important lesson Rich Dad shared was about financial education. He believed that most people struggle financially not because they are lazy or incapable, but because they were never taught how money actually works. Schools teach math, science, and history, but they rarely teach how to manage money, invest wisely, or build assets. As a result, people grow up with a limited understanding of finance. They make decisions based on emotions, societal pressure, or short-term desires, rather than long-term strategy. Rich Dad encouraged Robert to constantly learn, observe, and question everything about money. He taught him that financial intelligence is one of the most valuable skills a person can develop. The more you understand money, the more control you have over your life. Slowly, Robert's mindset began to shift. He no longer saw money as something to earn and spend. He started seeing it as something to manage, grow, and multiply. He understood that every financial decision he made would either move him closer to freedom or keep him stuck in the same cycle. And perhaps the most important realization of all was this: being rich is not about luck, background, or even intelligence. It's about learning the rules of money and playing the game differently. Because once you understand the difference between assets and liabilities, you stop working just to survive and start building a life where money works for you. And this was just the next step in Robert's journey, because the deeper he went, the more he realized that the real battle was not outside, but inside his own thinking. As Robert continued spending more time with his rich dad, he began to notice something even deeper than assets and liabilities. It wasn't just about what people did with money. It was about how they thought about money. Rich Dad explained that the biggest difference between those who become wealthy and those who don't lies in their mindset, especially in how they deal with fear and risk. Most people are not poor because they lack opportunities. They are poor because they are controlled by fear. The fear of losing money, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of looking foolish, and most importantly, the fear of stepping outside their comfort zone. These fears silently shape their decisions and keep them stuck in safe but limited financial paths. Robert realized that this fear was something he had felt many times before. Every time he thought about trying something new or taking a financial risk, there was always a voice in his head telling him to play it safe. That same voice existed in millions of people. It encouraged them to choose job security over opportunity, to avoid investing because of the possibility of loss, and to stay within familiar boundaries even if those boundaries limited their growth. Rich Dad explained that fear is natural. It is a part of being human. But the difference between the rich and the poor is how they respond to that fear. Poor and middle-class people often let fear control their actions, while rich people learn to manage it and move forward anyway. Another powerful idea that changed Robert's thinking was the role of mistakes in financial growth. Most people are taught to avoid making mistakes at all costs. In school, mistakes are punished with bad grades. In jobs, mistakes can lead to criticism or even losing employment. As a result, people grow up believing that mistakes are something to fear. But Rich Dad had a completely different perspective. He believed that mistakes are one of the most valuable ways to learn. Every successful investor, entrepreneur, or business owner has made mistakes, sometimes big ones. The difference is that they learn from those mistakes instead of being paralyzed by them. Robert began to understand that financial education does not come from avoiding failure. It comes from experiencing it, analyzing it, and improving because of it. Rich Dad often said that the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. In a world that is constantly changing, playing it completely safe can actually be more dangerous than taking calculated risks. Because when you avoid risks entirely, you also avoid opportunities. As this idea sank in, Robert started noticing how society conditions people to think in a limited way. From a young age, most people are taught to follow a predictable path: go to school, get good grades, find a stable job, and work hard for the rest of their lives. This path is designed to create security, but it rarely leads to financial freedom. Rich Dad explained that this system produces employees, not investors. It trains people to depend on income from work instead of building income from assets. One of the most powerful lessons Robert learned during this time was the concept of thinking differently from the crowd. Most people follow what everyone else is doing because it feels safe. If everyone is buying expensive houses, they feel they should do the same. If everyone is chasing high-paying jobs, they follow that path too. But Rich Dad emphasized that following the crowd often leads to average results. If you want a different outcome, you have to think differently. This means questioning common beliefs about money and being willing to take paths that others might not understand. Robert also began to see how emotions play a major role in financial decisions. Fear is not the only emotion that affects money. Greed is equally powerful. When people see others making money quickly, they often rush into opportunities without fully understanding them. They invest in things they don't understand, hoping to get rich fast. But this combination of fear and greed creates a dangerous cycle. People are afraid to take action when opportunities are small, but they become overly confident when opportunities appear big and exciting. This leads to poor decision-making and financial losses. Rich Dad taught Robert that controlling emotions is one of the most important financial skills a person can develop. It's not enough to know what to do. You must also have the discipline to act rationally, even when emotions are pulling you in different directions. This ability to stay calm and think clearly during uncertain situations is what separates successful investors from everyone else. As Robert reflected on everything he had learned so far, he realized that becoming wealthy was not just about money. It was about personal growth. It required changing habits, challenging beliefs, and developing a mindset that was different from what society commonly teaches. It meant being willing to learn continuously, to take calculated risks, and to stay patient even when results were not immediate. One evening, as Robert walked home thinking about these lessons, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he understood that the biggest obstacle to financial success was not external circumstances. It was internal thinking. The way a person thinks about money determines the decisions they make, and those decisions shape their future. And that realization opened the door to an even deeper lesson, because understanding mindset and fear was just the beginning. The next step in his journey would reveal something even more practical: the exact skills and habits required to build financial intelligence and take control of money in the real world. By this point, Robert had already begun to see money in a completely different way. He understood that wealth was not about working harder, but about thinking differently. He had learned the importance of assets, the dangers of fear and greed, and the role mindset plays in financial success. But now, Rich Dad introduced him to something even more practical: the concept of financial intelligence. He explained that if someone truly wants to take control of their financial future, they must develop specific skills that go far beyond what traditional education teaches. These skills are not taught in schools, yet they determine how well a person handles money in the real world. Rich Dad described financial intelligence as a combination of knowledge and action. It's not just about understanding concepts. It's about applying them in everyday life. The first and most important skill he taught Robert was accounting. Not in a complicated, technical sense, but in a simple way: understanding where your money is coming from and where it is going. Most people, he explained, don't truly know their financial position. They earn money, they spend money, and at the end of the month, they wonder where it all went. Without clarity, it becomes impossible to build wealth. But when you understand your financial flow, you gain control. The second skill was investing. Rich Dad made it clear that investing is not just for wealthy people. It is how people become wealthy. But many individuals avoid investing because they believe it is too risky or too complex. In reality, the biggest risk is not learning how to invest at all. When people keep all their money in savings without allowing it to grow, they lose the opportunity to benefit from compounding. Rich Dad encouraged Robert to study investments, understand how different assets work, and make informed decisions instead of acting out of fear. The third skill was understanding markets. Rich Dad explained that markets are driven by emotions just as much as logic. Prices go up not only because of value but also because of demand, hype, and perception. This means that opportunities often appear when others are afraid, and risks increase when others become overly excited. People who understand this pattern can make better decisions by acting against the crowd rather than following it blindly. The fourth skill was the ability to understand the law, not in the sense of becoming a lawyer, but in knowing how taxes, regulations, and financial structures work. Rich Dad explained that wealthy people often use legal systems to their advantage. They structure their businesses and investments in ways that minimize taxes and protect their assets. Meanwhile, many employees pay high taxes because they lack this knowledge. This lesson opened Robert's eyes to the fact that financial success is not just about earning money. It's about keeping and protecting it as well. As Robert absorbed these lessons, he began to realize that financial intelligence is like a toolbox. The more tools you have, the more problems you can solve. Without these skills, people are forced to rely on others for financial advice, often making decisions they don't fully understand. But with knowledge, they gain independence and confidence. Another important idea Rich Dad emphasized was the difference between working for learning and working for money. Most people choose jobs based on salary. They focus on how much they will earn rather than what they will learn. But Rich Dad advised Robert to take a different approach. He encouraged him to choose opportunities that would teach valuable skills, even if they didn't offer the highest pay initially. Because in the long run, the skills a person develops determine how much they can earn and how well they can manage their finances. This idea challenged everything Robert had been taught. Society often measures success by income, but Rich Dad measured it by knowledge and growth. He believed that someone who continuously learns and improves will eventually create far more wealth than someone who only focuses on short-term earnings. Robert also noticed that Rich Dad encouraged action over perfection. Many people wait for the perfect moment to invest, start a business, or take financial risks. They spend years thinking, planning, and hesitating, but never actually take action. Rich Dad believed that learning happens through doing. Even small steps, even imperfect decisions, are better than standing still. Because he understood that this journey was not just about becoming rich. It was about gaining control over his life. It was about having the ability to make choices without being limited by money. And that realization gave him a sense of clarity he had never felt before. But even with all this knowledge, one final piece of the puzzle remained. Because understanding money and developing skills was only part of the journey. The next and final lesson would reveal something even more important: the habits and actions that separate those who dream about financial freedom from those who actually achieve it. By the time Robert reached the final stage of his learning, something inside him had completely transformed. What once felt confusing and overwhelming about money now started to feel clear and controllable. He had learned about assets and liabilities, understood the role of fear and mindset, and developed a foundation of financial intelligence. But now came the most important lesson of all: the difference between knowing and doing. Because in the real world, knowledge alone doesn't create wealth. Action does. Rich Dad explained that many people spend their entire lives learning about money, but never actually apply what they know. They read books, watch videos, attend seminars, and collect information, yet they hesitate when it comes to taking real steps. The reason is simple: fear of failure, fear of losing money, and fear of stepping into the unknown. But Rich Dad believed that true success belongs to those who take action despite that fear. He often said that in life, opportunities don't wait for perfect conditions. They appear unexpectedly, and only those who are prepared and willing to act can take advantage of them. Robert began to understand that building wealth is not about one big decision. It's about small, consistent actions repeated over time. It's about choosing to invest instead of spend, learning instead of avoiding, and moving forward instead of staying stuck. Every financial choice, no matter how small, shapes the future. And those small choices compound just like money does. Another powerful realization came when Rich Dad talked about discipline. He explained that discipline is the bridge between goals and results. Without discipline, even the best financial knowledge becomes useless. Many people start with good intentions. They decide to save money, invest wisely, or build assets. But over time, they lose consistency. They get distracted, they give in to short-term desires, and they return to old habits. But those who succeed are the ones who stay consistent even when it's difficult, even when results are not immediately visible. Robert saw this clearly. He realized that the difference between those who achieve financial freedom and those who don't is not talent or luck. It's consistency. It's the ability to keep going when progress feels slow, to stay focused when distractions appear, and to trust the process even when outcomes are uncertain. Rich Dad also emphasized the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people. He believed that environment plays a huge role in shaping financial behavior. If you spend time with people who constantly complain about money, avoid risks, and think negatively, it becomes easy to adopt the same mindset. But if you surround yourself with individuals who are learning, growing, and taking action, you naturally begin to think and behave differently. This shift in environment can accelerate growth in ways that are often underestimated. As Robert reflected on everything he had learned, he realized that becoming financially successful is not about changing your situation overnight. It's about changing your habits, your thinking, and your daily actions. It's about building a lifestyle that supports long-term growth instead of short-term comfort. One evening, as he sat quietly thinking about his journey, he understood something deeply important. The path to financial freedom is not easy, but it is simple. It does not require extraordinary intelligence or special connections. It requires awareness, discipline, patience, and the courage to act. He looked back at where he started, a young boy confused about money, unsure of what it really meant to be successful. And now, he saw a completely different picture. He understood that money is not the goal. Freedom is the goal. And money is simply a tool that can help achieve that freedom when used wisely. As the lessons of Rich Dad echoed in his mind, one final thought stood out clearly. Most people spend their lives working for money, but only a few learn how to make money work for them. And that single shift in thinking can change everything. Robert closed the chapter of his learning, but not the journey. Because this was not an ending, it was a beginning. A beginning of a life where decisions are made with awareness, where risks are taken with understanding, and where every step moves closer to true financial independence. And as you listen to this story, the same question now stands in front of you. Will you continue working for money, or will you learn how to make money work for you?